How's it going out there, YouTube? My name is Jesse, and I am the curator for the Golden Age, and today we are doing Lost Heroes of the... Is something wrong? Why aren't you engaging?
I was drinking too much eggnog, and they begged me not to go.
The holidays, people like to celebrate.
I forgot my medication, so I staggered out the door into the snow.
Wait a minute, this sounds familiar.
And they found me Christmas morning at the scene of the attack.
No!
I had hoof prints on my forehead and incriminating claws marks on my back. I got run over by a reindeer.
Okay, stop!
What? It's a Christmas song.
It's not Christmas anymore. It's not even really that much of a traditional Christmas song.
You still have Christmas decorations up on the wall.
Well, that's beside the point. I'm lazy and I'm working on a video. I'll get the Christmas stuff down eventually.
Is this how we're going to do our request?
We don't need a giant lead into this. We covered a lot of Dynamic Man when we did Dynamic Boy.
First or second one?
Funny, the second one. We don't need a giant lead in. I do have some information specifically for Dynamic Man that wasn't included in the Dynamic Boy, but a large part of what this character was covered with his partner. So, let's go ahead and get into this.
Lost Heroes of the Golden Age.
Yes, Lost Heroes of the Golden Age with Dynamic Man. Dynamic Man, Burt McQuaid, first appeared in Dynamic Comics #1 in 1941. He was produced by Harry A. Chesler for Chesler Comics. He was created by Unknown. Somebody is credited with the creation of Dynamic Man. One of the interesting things that I've noticed whenever I've done the research is they all claim that Dynamic Man is a robot. Now, I think they might have been inferring his origin off of Project Superpowers, where he is a robot, and inferring it to the Golden Age character, because nowhere have I found specifically in his stories that says he is a robot. Now, I've gone through the first issue, and yes, he was created in a laboratory, but right where you might think it's a robot, it said the mechanisms release, and he comes out. I do believe that he was created in a laboratory. That is confirmed. There's no way to go against saying it. He's right there in the laboratory. Whether or not he's an android or a robot, it never specifically says that. It does in Project Superpowers, not in the origin. We'll cover the origin. You can make a determination of your own on whether you think he's a robot or just a test tube baby. Really. The second version of him, when the comic came back with issue 8 in, I believe, 1944, as I discussed with Dynamic Boy, he was a regular person, Burt McQuaid, who he was given a name at that time. There's only 3 issues. He didn't get a whole lot of character development before then. He was given treatments by a Dr. Stahai? I'm not sure. He was given superpowers that I described with Dynamic Boy, the second one. And his brother Ricky, which was, they say sidekick, but he was more of a partner than a sidekick. Now, there are the Dynamic Man, he made, let's see, there are 24 Dynamic comics except for the 4-issue gap, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there were 20 comics total. In the 20 comics, Dynamic Man appeared in all of them, but he was only the feature in 18 of these comics. So he wasn't always the featured story in all of them. In 2 of the issues, he wasn't the feature, and the Dynamic family only appeared in 5 of the covers. 3 of those covers look like Dynamic Man, and 2 of those covers look like Dynamic Boy. So, and out of all 20 issues, he had 18 appearances, he had 18 features, was in all of the comic books, but only 5 cover appearances, where 3 of those 5 were his. Now, there was these comic books, I'm not quite sure when they were put out, called Daring Adventures. Now, what they did is they picked out a lot of Golden Age heroes, and they made their own cover art for the comics, but they wouldn't appear like that. Here are the 3 cover issues of Daring Adventures, 10, 11, and 16, that were all starring Dynamic Man, but he is not in any of these costumes. These are reprints of the Dynamic comic stories, 3 of them. Now, in the Dynamic comics, how I mentioned that they were 18 appearances as the featured story, there is actually Now, there was a Dynamic Man that was done in Marvel Comics that actually appeared in 1940 when Chesler came out with their Dynamic Man. But the one from Marvel Comics was specifically an android, which might be why they wanted to shy away from being an android or a mechanical man in the Chesler comics, because they definitely would have been sued if that were it. I mean, you're already copying the name and many of the same powers. Let's see. Here I found that it was in the 1960s that they reprinted the 3 of the Dynamic Man stories. Different costumes on the cover, same costume in the comic book itself, which I think they should have changed it. It would have been interesting. Okay, powers to go. He's super strong, able to at least lift or stop a vehicle. He can fly. We don't know how fast he can fly. Nay, invulnerable. I don't believe that they were invulnerable. Everybody says they are. I think they were highly durable, because if they were highly vulnerable, they wouldn't have been shying away every time they were threatened to get shot. So let's go ahead and cover the origin story, and you pretty much know it from there. I covered it with Dynamic Man, or Dynamic Boy, the second one. So let's go over the first Dynamic Man, and then we can kind of see where they were going to be going with this feature going forward. And then we'll briefly cover who he was in his second appearance, which would have started in number 8. Now, on the opening page, we have the splash page, and the block where we're supposed to lead into the character, it actually describes the villain a bit. With ancient witchcraft and black magic at his command, the Yellow Spot sets out on a campaign to destroy the mentality of the human race, only to find the mighty Dynamic Man an obstacle impossible to overcome. And then we go, evening in the study of the, and I hate when they hyphenate words like this, eminent brain specialist. Why, it's a bat. And the bat takes on a horrible human shape, and he casts a hypnotic spell. And he puts this brain scientist under his spell. And then we see in a newspaper that the scientist has disappeared. And then we're at a great researcher and authority on ancient black magic, Dr. Monroe, reads of the strange happenings. It's come true. The ancient curse of the witches' knowledge destroyed their following, and so they vowed someday to wipe out all learned men. Okay, that is a weird thing to say like that. Okay, now we see him go into his laboratory, and he's talking about an experiment that he's working on. The power of steel, the speed of an eagle, and the wisdom of the sages have all been combined into one body. Now, he says body, because in this capsule is Dynamic Man, but they don't talk about him being a robot. Just then, the bat appears and turns into the character that we saw previous. The professor makes a leap for the switch. Now, he flips the switch, and then he gets stabbed. And as he's falling, we say, suddenly, a violent eruption shatters the laboratory. Mechanisms release a mighty figure, and the and the professor's dynamic man comes to life. Death to the dealers of death. Yes, he said death to the dealers of death. This guy does actually have magic and puts Dynamic Man in chains, but he breaks out of them. At no point do they call him a robot. Let's see, he talks to the professor and he flies to the location of the evil wizard, and we find out that he has a co-conspirator. Now he's trapped in a net that has been imbued with dark magic, and they tell him the only way to cut through the knife was like, let's see, you are in a net woven by black magic. Only the knife forged from the bones of a dying murderer can free you. That's very specific. So they're showing off how they can take the mental faculties of a man and reduce them to that of a child in this older scientist. He can now, as they go away and they leave Dynamic Man in the net, he convinces one of the scientists with the mind of a child to free him, or to give him the knife, because he said he's going to play with them. If they do, we have marbles. He says they bring him the knife, and he cuts himself free. Now he starts to battle what seems to be more evil henchmen. And this is one thing I hate. As he is moving, the characters are coming out of the panel. I absolutely cannot stand comic books where the characters come out of the panel. It's not bad. I guess they're trying to make the action come to life, but I don't like it. If you're going to do your stuff, keep it in the panel. Jack Kirby never had to do that to emphasize his actions. Anyways, he starts to beat up the bad guys, and the main antagonist is going to stab Dynamic Man in the back, but one of the scientists thinks that Dynamic Man is still going to play with them and give him marbles, so he actually body checks the main antagonist and knocks him down, and Dynamic Man faces him one-on-one and knocks him for a loop. He gets the mechanism onto the scientists while this guy is lying on the ground and basically brings their brains back. Somehow he knows how to work the machine. So the yellow spot, he turns into a bat and he escapes. And he catches up to the bat and he goes, let's see, only in that shape can he be killed? I must get him now before he changes. How the hell do you know that? You don't even know all the rules about black magic. How do you know he can only be killed in his bat form? So he kills the bat. It is finished. The yellow spot is rubbed from the world. But now the others have been restored to normality. And the world is rid of one of the last of the witches of old. And in the corner, Dynamic Man appears in Dynamic Comics, which is true. He really does appear in Dynamic Comics. So this is one time where they say he'll be there, and he actually is. And that's the end of the first issue. Okay, I misspoke in the explanation. It was issues 8, 12, and 13 that were the reprints. So that's why even though Dynamic Boy appeared in number 11, he wouldn't start back until issue number 14, because 12 and 13 were reprints. Now, in the issues of Dynamic Man, his strength was always apparent, but his durability, to me, seemed to be in question. I mean, I guess he was invincible. Now, it's kind of interesting how they restarted the original origin story in issue 8, yet they make him a different person. His second version, he is the head coach of the sports team, and his brother, I guess, goes to school because he's part of the team, and I think they might be in college. I'm not exactly sure on that. But this super strength is always apparent. From one of the other issues, it looks like he has the ability to breathe and talk underwater as well, which I mean, there are bubbles coming for him, but he doesn't need to be gasping for air. He's not holding his breath, and he's talking. So apparently he has the strength of underwater capabilities as well. So, you know most of Dynamic Man, and I described him with Dynamic Boy. Strength, highly durable, I don't think indestructible. They say he's a above average intelligence. I think if he was a robot, he would be a super sleuth. Like I said, never say it. So let's go over his Project Superpowers, where he is actually a robot, and talk a little bit about him being a main character in his storyline, because there is a number of converging storylines that come together. So let's talk about his role in Project Superpowers. So Dynamic Man was a main focal point in the storyline that was centered around him. We found out that in the beginning he was the keeper of the urn, which we would later find out was holding all the superheroes. Later, when the urn would be shattered, the hero started to reemerge, and we would find out that the true story of Dynamic Man is that he was a robot. It wasn't so much that he was evil, but he was showing in the eyes of the people that he was a hero, while Dynamic Man secretly wanted to be part of the Supremacy, which was a shadow organization basically trying to run the world, the shadow behind the shadow, the ones we didn't know about, the true leaders of the world. Dynamic Man was on course to become part of the Supremacy before the heroes were released, and he was fighting against the heroes and trying to undermine them from the outside, because they knew that they were against him, and he was controlling these army of crusaders at the time. It would all come to a head with the final battle against Zeus. Long storyline. Read Project Superpowers to understand more about that. And Dynamic Man would be there for the sacrifice that Dynamic Boy had done, which I mentioned in the Dynamic Boy video, which would cause Dynamic Man to be truly the hero that he always had imagined himself to be, and not the getting inspired by the Nazis in World War II as a way of control. Yes, they were impressed by the Nazis of World War II, not for their idealism, but for the way they all seemed to move as one unit and not separates. They were like, we don't want to take control of, the Nazis. We just want to put a new face on it. We want their kind of the way they run things. Anyways, Dynamic Man would truly know what it was to be a hero with the sacrifice of Dynamic Boy. He would participate in the last two major, all heroes on deck to fight the major bad guys. And then at the end of the storyline, he and Dynamic Woman, which I can't remember where she ever was in the Golden Age, if she ever was, would join the President and some of the other heroes as part of the new Supremacy. And that ends their roles in Project Superpowers. Well, I hope you liked this video. I'm trying to get all these requests in one at a time.